It's all about perspective. Conceding 7 goals in 180 minutes plus of soccer, not good. But it could have been worse. Just ask Barcelona supporters. There's a silver lining to everything. Almost. This is Miami Total Futbol Radio. I'm Eric Krakauer, joined as always by Inter Miami insider Franco Panizo, who has been busy making sense of the last 2 Inter Miami defeats and asking Diego Alonso all the tough questions. Franco, some of our listeners were a little annoyed about the break between the last few pods. They've sent us some tweets about that. Did you respond at all?
Well, yeah, of course. No, of course. There's people have been upset that the show's been kind of on and off, and they're like, when's the next show? Finally, the next show. I mean, we touched on that in last week's pod. We have found the solution. We have added a DP to our stable, to our roster, and he's definitely going to get more minutes than Roman Torres and Lee Nguyen put together. So
the comic relief starting early on today's pod, courtesy of Franco. As we explained on the last pod, and Franco just alluded to, the reason there was such a lengthy break between pods was due to our conflicting schedules and the quick succession of matches. And as Franco just mentioned, you do not have to fret because we do have the remedy to that scheduling nightmare. And the remedy's name is Steve Brenner, who is now the third MTFer on the pod. So, Steve, welcome to the team. And I think that maybe we should give you the floor to introduce yourself to our listeners, all 4 of them.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot. Obviously honored to be involved. And it's hoping we can sort of build it on and build it maybe better than the team is sort of starting right now. So it's been a difficult few weeks. Definitely the last couple of games have been pretty hard to watch. But you've got to try and keep the faith. So
you are covering Inter Miami now, and the fact that you have an English accent will make you more believable to a lot of our soccer audience.
I told him that. I compared him to like when ESPN had that wave of like British commentators that they started introducing to their broadcast for like U.S. men's national team games and MLS games. This was like a few years ago. I was like, Steve, you're the guy, man. Not only do you cover Inter Miami on like the day to day, and you know your stuff, but you have the English accent, so you're gonna make us that much more credible. David Beckham's definitely listening to the show after we announced your arrival formally on Twitter. So man, you've put a nice bow on the show for sure.
Yeah. They usually put like English actors when they're trying to sell medicine, some sort of medication. So that's the reason we've brought you in. But you actually have a little bit of a history working for newspapers in England.
That's correct. Yeah, I am working on my Peruvian twang. So just give me a few weeks and I'll have it nailed down. I'll be walking around Lima just like I'm the man. Yeah, look, worked in the UK covering soccer in London and then Newcastle for the Sun newspaper, and then came to New York freelance in 2013. Still working for UK papers, but once Beckham in 2014 announced, he was given the green light to buy the franchise, that obviously was great for me because being an Englishman in New York, English guy in the US, people are still very much interested in Beckham and what he's doing and this next sort of step. And I lived through when he was England captain. He was the sort of the bee's knees, so to speak. So people have been very, very interested. So I followed it up until that point, and I was actually thinking before that I spent a lot of those 6 years thinking, God, I can't wait for the football to start. I'm fed up of talking about court cases and Overtown and going to Overtown and talking about zoning laws and speaking to people that didn't want the stadium. And now we're actually getting to the games. Like, oh man, I don't even want to speak about the games anymore. When we go back to the court cases. So it's been a long journey. Now, just obviously to compound it now, it's so sad when we go to the matches and we see the fans sort of marooned outside trying to peek in. It just seems to have been one thing after another. They haven't been able to manage to get a break, which I'm sure we'll allude to some of that stuff later on. But it's great that they're there on the pitch. And I think it's been fascinating. The whole sort of creation of the club and to where we are now. Now is that next step, how's it going to go on the field? And I guess the answer right now is not great, but there's time.
Yeah, the next step is losing a few games. So before we continue, let's just give you a little preview of what's on this week's pod, we're going to break down the loss in Philadelphia, including Pipita Higuain's debut, which had a little blemish to it, apart from the defeat. We'll put the spotlight on Blaise Matuidi, who has now had enough time in Inter Miami colors to really allow us to draw some conclusions about where he fits in and just how much he's improved the team, if at all. And we'll address the most recent roster move, which we sort of predicted last week, or at least I did a little bit, and Franco agreed with me. So let's get to it. All right, the big news, of course, was that Gonzalo Higuain made it into the starting 11 for Inter Miami in their trip to Chester, PA, to face the Philadelphia Union for the second time in MLS history. The first time these two teams played each other was, of course, in the bubble, and Philadelphia, if I remember correctly, won that one as well. So this was the lineup for Inter Miami for the game. It was a 4-2-3-1 with Robles in goal. The backline of Figal, Reyes, Gonzalez Pires, Ben Sweat, and then a double pivot of Matuidi and Ulloa, Pizarro ahead of them with Morgan and Agudelo, and up top, the aforementioned Pipita, who cut a frustrated figure during this match. And Franco, I'll start with you. It didn't start very well for Inter Miami. They didn't seem like the most cohesive unit, and they had a little bit of trouble stifling what Philadelphia was throwing at them.
Yeah, so, I mean, Philadelphia is obviously one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, and it's not surprised that at home that they were able to implement or put their will and their stamp on the game from early on. They obviously had that very early look that Robles saves with his foot. I'm trying to remember who gets in behind Luis Morgan, but anyway, there was a clear chance early on for Philadelphia. Inter Miami eventually grew into the game after the first 15, 20 minutes, and they started creating some chances, especially when Higuain started to get on the ball a little more and started to find the rhythm of the game. Actually, I would say 15 minutes into the game, and then you saw Inter Miami start to have some positive play, but then obviously they give up a goal, and then the whole match changes. Diego Alonso goes on to change his tactics around the 30th minute, and it was a disjointed effort again. It was another disjointed performance from Inter Miami. It's kind of been what we've been more or less accustomed to seeing over the course of this season, which is, crazy to say, but there were some positives, but there weren't many.
Steve, you were at the game against the Red Bulls where Inter Miami lost 4-1. That was perhaps the worst performance that we've seen from Inter Miami, or at least one of them. Did you see anything different in this performance? Was there an improvement? Any difference at all that you spotted?
Not really. I mean, they're just too unconvincing, really. I think, especially at the back as well. I just think they're an accident waiting to happen. They can't seem to. Although, in the early stages of the season, they weren't really letting any goals in, but they weren't really scoring them as well. But I fear that they're just at the back. They're just susceptible every time. Like Red Bulls went forward, and again last night they just looked nervy. And whereas I think we're touching, Matuidi sort of faded out, but I mean Pizarro was a passenger really again, pretty anonymous, didn't really do anything. He's struggling to sort of cope, and you'd expect it's someone of his caliber maybe to control the centre of midfield, or certainly that upper third just a little bit better. He was kind of anonymous really, and I just don't think. Then that just heaps more pressure on a back line that are already creaking and don't look very confident at all. So there were some positives. Higuain did okay. I think he did it right. But remember, look at the players he's been playing with in the past. Even last season, he had Ronaldo, teeing him up. He hasn't got, when he was playing at Real Madrid, Toni Kroos or whoever it was. He's got that great support behind him that can then give him the options. Now, at the moment, he didn't have that. But fair play to him. He did well, and I did feel for him in the penalty a bit.
The defensive side of things, definitely concerning. 7 goals in 2 games, and that is after they had tightened things up at the back. In Atlanta, I thought they played well defensively. They conceded 2 against Orlando, but before that, they had 2 previous games where they managed 2 consecutive shutouts. And I think that the point that you bring up about the service to Higuain is certainly one that is concerning, although he did have his chances. He created one where he cut inside on the left side of the box and shot over the bar, and then the bicycle kick where he found himself in between two center backs, so he could have potentially scored it. And of course, he missed that penalty. And Franco, you need to confirm this, but I sent you a text about a minute before he took his penalty that he was going to kick the ball into the stands. What do you make of his performance?
I can confirm that you did text me that. I can also confirm that you've had 2 shameless plugs about yourself in the first 15 minutes of this, or 10 minutes of this episode. But look, I mean, you definitely called it, and you even said not only would he miss it, you said it was going in the stands, which is what happened. And I mean, I don't know if the pressure got to him or if he was just, I mean, he had tired legs at that point. This is his first game since August 7th. Me and Steve actually had talked about when his most recent game was a few days ago via text, and he hasn't played in a while, and he went the full distance. He went the 90 minutes, played. So maybe he had some tired legs, maybe he felt a little bit of pressure as well, and just obviously try to go for the home run, and obviously shoots it high and wide of the mark. Again, even with that, and I know everyone's focused on that, even the YouTube channel where I put up the Miami Total Futbol YouTube channel where I put up the PK miss, that's gotten like the most views of any video that we've put out. It's already up to like, I don't even know how many thousand right now. So that's definitely been the biggest talking point from this match for Inter Miami. But I think overall, he still had a good game. He was involved in some of the team's best chances, created one chance in the 13th minute, practically on his own by cutting by a defender, and he just showed little glimpses of the quality that Inter Miami has lacked up top for much of the season that they've needed. So I think it's only going to get better the more minutes he gets, the more used to he gets to playing with his new teammates. So I think this was an overall net positive in terms of Higuain's performance. I know obviously the missed penalty kick is a big mark against him, but you expect better days. I thought this was a good starting point for him.
Yeah, and he was very good in the build-up as well. In fact, I would make the point that the few times where Miami actually threatened and moved cohesively from the midfield onwards, he had to pinch into the midfield and make the ball work, like spreading the ball wide. By the way, my prediction was based on something that I know about Higuain, having covered a lot of his soccer, particularly at Real Madrid, and that is that he is a very emotional player. He's a guy who gets frustrated very easily, and he was growing in frustration in that game. And I've seen him whack at balls when he's frustrated, and I had a feeling that he was just going to try and pile drive that ball into the net. And considering the slick conditions and the overflowing frustration, that it was going to go into the stands. Steve, back to you. I think Franco paints a pretty positive picture about Higuain's performance and what and how he's going to help this team going forward. Does this performance indicate to you that he's the kind of guy that can galvanize those around him and maybe make them better?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, you know, the guy's sort of resume is second to none. You know, he's played in the World Cup final, seasoned international, played with some of the biggest clubs in the world, won some of the biggest titles. It can't fail to sort of galvanise not only the squad, but I think when other teams are lining up against him, they're going to see his name on the team sheet. I think that's what when happens when you have these big time players. It's gonna cause a bit of fear and a bit of uncertainty into the opposition. For sure, it's just around him, isn't it? It's the other players around him. I think he did great, but as you know, I've mentioned again, and maybe we're touching it. You know, Pizarro, what did he really do last night? What did he really sort of contribute? That's the other big game player other than Matuidi. You know, so they're just. Whereas Higuain was great, the others just was substandard, and that sort of dragged him down. You could tell he got frustrated. The weather was horrific. And, it was just one of those things. But I just think, generally in all, his hold-up play is great. He lays the ball off nicely. You know, he's a threat. It's just, can they use him and get the service into him? Because he's not going to be tracking back and doing it all himself. He needs the service. That's the bottom line.
I want to add something to that because obviously this was his first game in Inter Miami colors and an Inter Miami jersey. Got to see what he would bring to the table. Even if you know what he's about, you kind of got to see what he's going to bring and how the team's kind of going to play with him. And you didn't see the team high press like they've pressed before. They did it in certain moments. Higuain didn't really high press. You didn't see him running about. He was much more contained in how and when he moved when Inter Miami didn't have the ball. I think that influenced the run of play and how Inter Miami defended. And I also think, like you guys said, though, that he was very good with his hold-up play, his ability to win the ball, fight off defenders, pick up his head, and the vision he showed to switch to the point of the attacks and play the ball out wide and help generate and move the ball forward. All of that was good. Defensively, though, I thought it was very interesting that Inter Miami went away from the high pressing, which was probably to be expected. Higuain, even at his probably best physical levels, is not going to be able to chase about and run about like maybe Julian Carranza or Robbie Robinson have at different points this season. But just wanted to add that because I thought it was something that also needs to be touched on as well, as that's a big point of how Inter Miami plays.
Well, there are also different types of pressure, right? It's not just, if you have a well-executed zonal press, intermittent press. I think Gonzalo Higuain is more than capable of doing it, but it has to be organized, right? And if anything, Inter Miami, I think, is going to get the best of Gonzalo Higuain if they do actually push their lines up, because he's not the fastest player in the world. He's going to give you more if he's playing in short spaces. Going back to what Steven said about Pizarro not performing well, I was going to say this perhaps not the best game for him to really not show up, although we can give him some leniency considering that he has been with Morgan the most productive player on this team in terms of creating chances not only for himself but his teammates. Morgan, I think, had a few pretty good moments in this game. But Franco, you want to put the spotlight on Blaise Matuidi, who has now been a part of this midfield for a few weeks. We saw the immediate impact that he had in his first game, covering every blade of grass for Miami. What do you make of his progression over the last few games?
So his first game, like you just touched on, I think was his best game, and I don't think he's been able to replicate that. I don't think he's played particularly well. I'm not saying he's been poor, but he also hasn't been as good as you would expect or as you might expect from a Juventus player. And this game was just the latest example of that. Now, if you go back to the New York Red Bulls game really quickly, he also commits a clumsy challenge in the box, gives away a penalty kick that gives the Red Bulls the lead in the first half in the opening 15 minutes of the match. And then in this one, on the second goal, he doesn't track back, doesn't show the urgency that you need or that you would expect from a defensive midfielder or a center midfielder that has the experience that he has. He's won a World Cup with France's national team, and he's done so as a starter, not as a bench player or a rotational player. He was a starter for that team. He was a contributor to Juventus. I don't think he's lived up to what you need him to live up to. I think he needs to influence games a lot more on both ends. In this one, he did pass the ball well. He did move the ball well forward. There was the one free kick that he took really quickly, really astutely, and that led to the Ben Sweat chance that Andre Blake saved very well. But again, it's just not good enough over on both facets, in my opinion. I think you need to get more out of Blaise Matuidi in order for this team to be able to play at a higher level and play at a better level. And I know Steve's talked about Pizarro, and I think it's going to make for a great pod and great chemistry on this, because I don't necessarily agree, and I know we're going to have plenty of debates as we have had in the past, but I don't necessarily agree that this is on Pizarro. I think just the midfield in general is just not clicking. There's something that's just not working with this group, whether it's personnel, whether it's tactics, whether it's all of the above. Throw it in a blender, and this is what you've got. Like, I don't put this only on Pizarro. I think there's more to it, and I think Matuidi, who was brought in to give Inter Miami a little more football, a little more soccer, a little more ability to play with the ball, and he has done that, but hasn't been nearly enough, in my opinion. I think he needs to do more if this team's going to be anywhere close to what it expects to be.
Steve?
Well, Franco's obviously put words in my mouth there. I never accused Pizarro of just the sole reason why they were struggling. I think he has been struggling. But with Matuidi, I mean, it is early days for him. He's trying to adapt. I think that the way the seasons in Europe and here as well has sort of been broken down, players are just a little bit off. They had to come back and finish the season. They haven't really had a proper preseason. He's then come into a team that's struggling. And if he's like a ball-winning midfielder who just keeps them ticking. But I think because of the sort of lack of top quality. He's gone from playing with Cristiano Ronaldo and Dybala to Victor Aloa and those other guys. They're just not on the same level. So maybe he's the workload is increased more on him, and he's having to bail things out. He's being drawn back to try and clean up some of the mess of the defense, and that's causing him problems. Maybe he's a little bit unnatural there. I think it's a little bit early to be being a little bit disappointed with him. He was terrible against the Red Bulls, but I just think it's early days for him now. I think he's just trying to compensate for the lack of sort of form and confidence probably around him. That's the sort of problem right now. But we'll see. But just don't put words in my mouth.
Yeah, don't put words in his mouth, Franco. And I don't
know. I heard a lot of Pizarro talk and from Steve there in the opening 15 minutes of the pod.
Just to jump on a couple of things that Steve said. Number one, right, that consistency is going to take time to come. Let's not forget that this is still a young team, right? And there was a change to the back line in the last game, and believe it or not, that makes a bit of a difference, because once you have a back line and even a midfield line that is gelled over a number of games, and then you chop and change it, that has an impact. But also, the consistency is difficult to achieve when a team is new. And I'm not sure, and Franco, you've alluded to this, whether we've actually seen fundamentally a concrete plan from Diego Alonso, who is still trying to figure out his players and how best to line them up.
I mean, Alonso's tactics, that we've talked about them at length here, and I want to touch on this in the second segment, because I think when we get to the player and recent roster reshuffling that we've seen, I want to expand on that later, because if I touch on it now, then we're not going to get to it later, and I think it's something that deserves its own segment. But I think Alonso, like I mentioned before, in this one he had an idea for the game plan, and then after 30 minutes he realized it wasn't working. Diego Alonso, one of the most clear things you can define from his playing style is that he likes width, and he wants crosses in from wide positions. And Inter Miami wasn't getting much of that. Obviously, you had the one play where Nico Figal whips in across from the right, and Gonzalo Higuain hit that overhead kick that kissed the outside part of the far post. But there wasn't enough of that, and that's why 30 minutes into the game, he makes the tactical switch and moves out of the 4-2-3-1 and moves into either. I know you were saying you thought it was a 4-4-2. I was saying it looked more like a 4-3-3. With Pizarro going out wide to the left. And I do agree with Steve that he did drift in and out of the game. He didn't have as much of an impact as you would expect him to once they moved him out wide. But, the tactics leave something to be desired, for sure. I think there's more to it, and like I said, we can expand on that in the second segment. Okay,
I was going to just ask Steve whether you think there's something to point the finger at in terms of Diego Alonso and his tactics.
Well, we always say he's arch pragmatist, sort of safety first, but they're wide open at the back the whole time. They can't seem to take any pressure off the defense. Every time they get the ball in the middle of the pot, they're losing it, and then straight away, he loves Reyes. I'm not really sold on him. They're crying out for an experienced guy at the back. I know we're going to touch on this later on, but he's let Torres go. I just think they need someone like that. Just a guy with over 100 international experiences, just a bit of experience. They're just really young and sort of a bit naive, not young, but just a bit naive at the back. They're just like an accident waiting to happen. I thought that was his whole game plan, that he would create this sort of solid unit. And maybe in the previous games that they've been sort of a harder nut to crack, but the last two games have been pretty alarming in terms of how easily they've been sort of carved open and not offering a hell of a lot going forward. So he's been in the job a while now. We've been talking. The season started in March. We've had this big break, but he had a long time to work on what exactly he wants. And I don't know. I like a manager or coach that thinks on his feet and changes it. But for him to sort of change it after half an hour, thinking maybe he hasn't got it right, I don't know. I guess the proof's in the pudding, and they lost 3-0. So,
yeah, I think it's funny that you're actually pointing the finger at Reyes, who I think had one of probably his worst game. He's also been snake bitten. I think that was the term that Andres Cordero used to describe what has happened to him. He had that injury in the bubble where he had to be taken to the hospital. He got he had a clash of heads in this one. He's been pretty unfortunate, but in the game against Philadelphia, it was for me the one game where he's looked shaky, where he didn't seem confident in his abilities. Because other than that, I actually think that he's been quite bright, and we have to take into consideration that he is still very young. Franco.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on that because me and Steve talked obviously before games when we go to Inter Miami CF Stadium, and he mentioned that about Reyes, and he's not necessarily super high or super sold on him as of right now. Hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, Steve. But look, I'm of the opposite thinking of Steve on this point. And I know a lot of fans have been critical of Reyes as of late, and he has had issues. And like you mentioned, he's a young player, but I thought this game was actually one of his better, more recent games. He wasn't directly involved in any of the goals they gave up, not in the first one, and then he wasn't even on the field for the other two. He did have the one issue early on where he couldn't trap the ball cleanly, and it kind of got away from him, and then he fouls Sergio Santos before he breaks in on goal and gets a yellow card. But after that, I thought he was fairly solid. He didn't make any any errors, and I think he's a good center back. I think he's going to grow into being a very good center back if Inter Miami can keep them keep him on the roster. And yes, he has been, like you said, Eric, snake bitten. He's gotten hurt on a few occasions. He's got a silly red card during MLS is back, or maybe an unfair red card during MLS is back. But I think he's definitely one of the better center backs in this group, and I think there's a reason why Diego Alonso keeps going to him. His passing, you didn't see much of his passing in this game, but it's obviously been a big factor of why he's getting minutes as well. He can pass the ball with the ball on the ground and split lines and break lines that way, and I think he didn't see much of it this game, but I think overall he's been more positive than negative this season. I think we touched on that recently.
He wasn't the only player on this team who couldn't, thread passes correctly. The link-up play was pretty poor. But talking about center backs real quick before moving on, Gonzalo Pires had quite the battle with Sergio Santos, with a lot of elbows being thrown, and that was certainly one of the subplots of this game. And I do have to mention the second goal that Philadelphia scored, which was, criticize the defensive side all you want on the part of Inter Miami, but Brennan Aronson in tight spaces and just that movement from Philadelphia in between the lines to release Ilsinho to knock it into essentially what was an empty net was something to behold. And it's good to see that kind of play in MLS.
He's good, man. He's good.
And Aronson, I don't think is going to be playing for the Union much longer, with interest in Philadelphia growing quickly. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll talk about some personnel shifting at Inter Miami. Okay, the big news this week, and Franco, you texted me about this because you found out that this was going to happen before pretty much everybody else, and we had alluded to this situation being, this potential situation actually happening. And what I'm talking about, will no longer beat around the bush, is Roman Torres being shipped out of Inter Miami after being a bit part player, if that, for Diego Alonso. He's going back to Seattle, where he won the MLS Cup. So, Franco, why don't you start? You found out that this was happening. What does this mean for the roster, and what did Inter Miami get in return?
So I caught wind of this over the weekend. Obviously, the news was broken today. I wasn't the one to break it. Hat tip to Paul Tenorio and Sam Stejskal of The Athletic. They beat me to the punch. But look, Roman Torres is heading back to Seattle. The trade's already been announced. It was announced earlier today. He's already in Seattle. He's already arrived. Seattle's already posted on their social channels his arrival with his suitcases and the whole thing. And it was just a case of him falling out of favor. He obviously started the first 2 games of the year at center back for Inter Miami, gets a red card in week 2, plays 2 more games, gets 2 more starts at MLS' back, and then that was it for him. Once Leandro Gonzalez Pires came into the picture, that was it for Roman Torres. He played legit 1 minute since MLS is back, and that was off the bench in the recent road victory against Atlanta United, where he just came in to help close out the game. He was clearly not rated highly by head coach Diego Alonso, and I think it was crystal clear last week against the Red Bulls when he didn't dress, when he wasn't in uniform and up for on the match day roster against the New York Red Bulls, and Christian Makoun, who they just loaned out to their USL team on a season-long loan, and they had recalled him to dress and be in the match day squad. I think it was crystal clear that Roman Torres' time was up with Inter Miami then. And I didn't tweet that out, I didn't put it out publicly, but I definitely said it internally to people in the business and was like, man, Roman Torres. And that's kind of what led me to figuring out that he was gone, because I started sniffing around, and that's what eventually I found out he was heading back to Seattle. I think, like Steve said earlier, I think Roman Torres could have had a place in this squad. I think he could contribute something. I don't think he was a natural fit. Like I wrote back in week 2 on SBIsoccer.com, his passing deficiencies are not what Diego Alonso wants, and that's probably the reason that he didn't get as much time or much of any time over the last 2 months. I think that was a big strike against him, and obviously something we saw back in week 2 when he gets the red card. So he was surplus to requirements. They've moved him just like they've moved Lee Nguyen and a few other pieces. I mean, for him, it's probably a good move, although I felt like he was kind of happy here in Miami with the Latin vibe, and he definitely, I think, when he arrived, was like, man, this kind of reminds me of my Panama, so I thought he was happy here, but, maybe he'll have a chance for more playing time in Seattle, which is what he's looking for, I'm sure, and for Inter Miami, it frees up some cap space. I'm sure Roman Torres wasn't the cheapest bargain deal, so probably a win-win, although I think that he could have remained on this roster for the rest of this year just to give them some option off the bench.
Steve, you were talking about Andres Reyes before and how he's young and, perhaps not as impressive defensively as Franco and I think he has been, although impressive perhaps is a overstatement. What do you make of Torres' departure?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like Franco said, clearly, Diego Alonso didn't rate him, but you look at his stats and where he's been at. He's been at a World Cup. He's 34 years of age. He's been around the league, and in his previous incarnation at Seattle, he's got experience, and he's just an older head. And I just think that the team is sort of crying out for just a bit of experience, someone that can sort of lead from the front. Yeah, maybe he's not as comfortable on the ball as some of the other guys, but he's still a pretty wholehearted individual, puts his body on the line, etc., etc. I just think that the team need and lack experienced heads, a good old-fashioned, John Terry-esque, some Alexi Lalas, whatever, just that sort of strong. Maybe not Alexi Lalas if he's listening. If he's listening, great, definitely Alexi Lalas. But just someone
I'm just picturing the listeners being like, man, that guy Steve Brenner, he just compared Roman Torres to John Terry and Alexi Lalas.
Half John Terry, half Alexi Lalas. No, yeah. just a bit of experience. I just think that they're naive at times, especially at the back. And look, Diego Alonso probably knows more than me. He's seen him day in, day out in training. So who am I to say not? But I just like just to have a bit of experience there, because as we mentioned before, Reyes, as good a player he is, he hasn't really played a lot of sort of first top class football of note, really, and he's so young. I don't know, and who knows? Maybe Torres fancied the move and he wants to go back to Seattle, so we don't really know. But on the just reading between the lines, it's a shame they couldn't have tried to incorporate, because I just think you can't buy that kind of experience.
Well, he certainly was happy leaving here. Maybe not because Miami culturally is closer to his native Panama, but the fact that he wasn't playing, and if he goes back to Seattle, it obviously means that they're interested in slotting him in to their defense. Although, given the way that they've been playing, I don't know if they need to make any changes at all. this season. But the point that you bring up of experience is a good one here, Steve, because if you look at every line on this team, from Luis Robles, defensive line, midfield line, and forward line, there's experience everywhere. There is a leader everywhere, except maybe in the defense, although it's important to note that Leandro Gonzalez Pires is a guy who played for River Plate, and he's a guy who's won the MLS Cup, and he was a dominant figure in the locker room in Atlanta. So perhaps, you take Gonzalez Pires out of the equation, and you see a lack of real experience there. And I'm not just talking about age, but I'm also talking about career, because Ben Sweat is 29 years old, so he's got plenty of experience, but he hasn't played at a World Cup like Roman Torres. In the midfield, you have Matuidi, and of course now up top you have Gonzalo Higuain. How important do you think that is, Franco, that you don't have that sort of experience in that back line, and that we have seen that they are a little bit fragile right now?
Listen, I think Gonzalo Pires, like you just said, checks off the boxes in terms of someone that has experience, maybe not international experience like Roman Torres has, but I think Gonzalo Pires has enough experience that he can lead that back line. I think he knows MLS a good bit. Obviously, he played at Atlanta United, won an MLS Cup, like you mentioned, and that spirit and that, like, hey, I'm going to lead this, and, like, just that feistiness that you want out of a center back sometimes. So, like, in terms of leadership, I don't think that Inter Miami is losing out on a whole lot. Yes, Roman Torres has experience, and they lose something there, but I don't think they lose out on a whole lot. And I think Gonzalo Pires is a much better player than Roman Torres at this point in his career. And I'll add this small part. He left Seattle because they couldn't come to terms, and because he wasn't even seeing that much of the field there towards the end. I think he played during the playoff run due to some injuries, and helps them win an MLS Cup, their second MLS Cup that he helped them win. But I think he's fallen off of what he used to be. He's older at this point in his stage in his career. I don't think he's what he used to be. I don't think he can give you as much as he once did. So I think he could have been on the roster. I think he was definitely a depth piece, but not ready to be any more a capable starter.
Right, and that right now that is the issue, and we saw it against Philadelphia, that depth will be a problem now. What happens when you need to move another center back or another player into that position, just like we saw with Figal, which forced Niles into the game yesterday? And that is actually the topic of one of the questions that we have from one of our listeners. And after a short break, we'll answer those. Time to answer your questions, and we got a few of them. And of course, as is tradition here in the podcast, one person sending about 20 questions, and we're going to go to the.
Hey, I told him in the tweet. There, have at it, no limit. Don't listen to Eric. He's never right. I'm just kidding. I didn't say all that, but I did say no limit. Just have at it. Like, because our MTFers, our listeners, are the ones that are very vocal and that regularly chime in. Like, I don't know. I've grown to really, really appreciate that group, because they're definitely into it, man. They're definitely into the team. They're definitely into the pod, and I've grown to really like their personalities that they mess with us a little bit on Twitter. So, have at it, guys. Don't let Eric dissuade you from asking 37 questions per tweet.
Okay. Well, hearkening back to the point that I made before closing out the last segment, Gabe P at Gabe P25759836. I hope that's not your phone number. This is his question. Since we let go of Roman Torres, should we plan to get a new right back to cover that position better and move Figal to a back line three, where I see the team more stable? Also, we need to stop making so many fouls. I feel like every game we get a yellow card on a defense. Well, that's that part is a part of the game. Lots of yellow cards. But let's address the right back situation. Steve, I've long said on this pod that Figal should be starting as a center back. Do you think that right back position is problematic? Do they need to add somebody there?
Well, I think it would help his Diego Alonso's plan if he could have someone that would. I think he likes his fullbacks to get it up and down the wing, and if he's keeping that middle five, whatever, quite narrow, then he can have that. I don't know if Figal is that guy that he can just keep on bombing down the right hand side. I think Sweat did okay last night. I think he got forward and sort of contributed a bit. But yeah, they need a kind of a ball player, sort of a wing back, a modern sort of wing back that can sort of contribute in midfield and higher up. And I don't think he's that guy. So there's probably going to be some sort of more changes there. And they're making a lot of roster changes and changes sort of mid-season, where you would have thought that they would have had their sort of style and how they would want to play lockdown. So they've got a lot of, and the longer they go on, losing games and struggling, then the more sort of pressing this issue is going to be.
What's interesting, Franco, is that at the beginning of the season, I said that I'd like to see this team play with a 3-man back line. And you look at the squad right now, and you look at the left side, the left corridor, and you see a player like Ben Sweat. You see a player like, why can't I think of his name right now? Blondie Locks. Breck Shea. Two players who can play the wing. Who can play the wing back role. But you look at the right side, question marks about Dylan Nealis being able to patrol his corridor in the same way. And I'm not sure Morgan is the kind of player who can put in the defensive shift, and perhaps you lose something of his ability or his best attributes up top. But what do you think about that right back situation?
Listen, for me, I don't think that this team is necessarily best suited to play with a 3-man backline or a 5-man backline, however you want to look at it. I don't think they have the wing backs or the players that can fill in as wing backs and do that job. Ben Sweat has shown that he can get up and down the wing and be effective in that way. Dylan Nealis seems to me more of a traditional natural right back. Yes, he can get forward and give you something, but he doesn't have that back and forth that you would need out of a wing back in that 5-man back line. I think, to answer the question that Gabe asked, I think that right back spot is going to be something that Inter Miami is going to look to address this offseason. I think they're going to put in Nicolas Figal at center back and get him back to his most comfortable position. I asked him about that last week on the conference call that Steve and I were on before the game, and he said, my natural position center back, but if Diego needs me at right back at this moment in time, I'll do it. I'll do what's best for the team. It's clear his best position is center back. I think in the beginning of the season you saw how good he could be there. He hasn't played there much recently, but right now you're in the middle of the season, and in MLS you have salary cap. You have to move pieces around in order to make another signing. So I think you're going to see Figal continue to be the right back for the rest of this year, and you're going to see Reyes and Gonzalo Pires in the heart of the defense, because essentially the decision is Figal either plays at right back and you start Reyes in the middle, or you put Figal in the middle and you put Nealis on the right. And who would you rather have, a rookie right back or a young and green center back? I mean, anybody can have their opinion on that. I would take Reyes over Nealis at this point. That's just me. So definitely a position they're going to want to address this offseason.
The curious thing about that question that you just asked is, if you had asked it about 10 years ago, the obvious answer would be put the weaker player as a right back, right? Your center back, you need your stronger player. But in modern football, you know how important the fullbacks are. And I think that's one of the added benefits of having Ben Sweat is that he's actually quite good in the attacking third. He's offered a lot in Breck Shea when he's come in a more advanced role, not as a left back. He's added a little bit of pizzazz as well. Now, Franco, I know there's a topic that you want to talk about, which is roster before manager and not the other way around. And there's a segue to that. And so this is a question from JR Reed 11, which is interesting because his name is JR Reed 11, but he's at JRRC 171. So showcasing all the numbers that he likes there.
The number of questions he submits every week. That's
that's right. He says, "Hey guys, with all the current roster changes, who else do you think will be leaving the club? I'm thinking Trapp will be the next one out. Will Inter Miami bring in more players that can fit Alonso's system? If not, would changing the formation to a 3-5-2 with Higuain and Robbie work?" And then he adds, only because Robbie can pressure the defense like he did during the DC United game. Let's not talk about the back three, but let's talk about the roster itself and the fact that Will Trapp hasn't played. And I will start with you, Franco. He hasn't been the fundamental piece in midfield alongside Matuidi as you had predicted. Are his days numbered, in your opinion, in Miami?
I think he'll finish out the season unless he gets on a crazy run of good form, and after in the off season maybe he makes a move or they move him because he's a U.S. international. He needs playing time to stay in that picture and stay in contention for that ahead of World Cup qualifiers and ahead of the World Cup. And if he's not getting that Inter Miami, he's going to look elsewhere. And Inter Miami could probably be best used to move him if they're just going to have him sit on the roster. I thought he looked good coming off the bench in this one. I thought he made a case to earn a start next to Matuidi, and we've talked about Will Trapp's defensive deficiencies, so maybe Matuidi can help mask some of those, and I think that's worth a look at this point because you know what Ulloa and Matuidi can give you, and it just hasn't been good enough like we touched on earlier. But just to the point of the roster, and we touched on this a few pods ago, and I'm curious to hear Steve's take on it. Me and Steve haven't talked about this, but to me, this latest move of the question obviously comes from the fact that Roman Torres was moved. And Roman Torres, this is the fifth player that they've moved in recent weeks. And this just, to me, it's clear, very clear now, more than ever, that the roster reshuffling is happening because Diego Alonso just doesn't rate some of the players that were brought in before he was signed. You have to remember Diego Alonso was hired very late in the process, like weeks before preseason began, 2 months and some change before the season began. He was hired on December 30th. Some of the roster building was already in place, and they did so with this idea that they were going to be an attacking team, a free-flowing, possession-based team. That's all they talked about. They had been reportedly in conversations with Marcelo Gallardo and Patrick Vieira. They didn't land either one of them. They end up going with Diego Alonso, and Alonso maybe doesn't fit the original vision they had in mind. And now, as he's gotten some time with the players, as he's gotten games, he's saying, look, this piece, and this piece don't work for me. So, if we have them here, they're not going to play. So if you can find better situations for them, then by all means. You saw it with Lee Win, who, me and you were in agreement that he has football, he has soccer to him, and thought he could contribute something, but Diego Alonso just didn't see it. Didn't feel like he had what he wanted out of his system. So I think you're really seeing, and I think that's what Inter Miami is struggling with at this point in the season. I think it's very clear now. The roster that was built is not what Alonso wants out of his team, and I think you're seeing those issues arise, and I think that's why Inter Miami is struggling. I'm very curious as to what Steve thinks about that.
The floor is yours, Steve.
No, yeah, I just casting my mind back when I was writing all the previews for the LAFC game, the first game, and we was like, Diego's only been in charge for 8 weeks or however long it was, and like Franco said, he's right. The guy came in and he had pretty much a lot of players there that he probably didn't want, but then didn't Paul McDonough or any one of those guys do that? They must have done their homework on Diego Alonso, and he would have seen the squad. And look, good for Diego. He wanted the job. It's a great job. He was going to go for it. He probably didn't say to them, I'm going to come here, but I don't think all the players are naturally my fit. So this, it's a difficult sort of balancing act, isn't it? The guy wanted the job, he came, and he's had to make changes. And I guess that comes with taking over a franchise club like that. You had to get the players in. Yet once the targets fell away, they were left with a third choice, who then turns out he didn't rate the players anyway. So I don't know. It's teething problems in trying to create a squad and a club ethos and all that other PR stuff that they talk about. But we were there when Jorge Mas. We're going to go to the playoffs. We're going to create this brand of football to get the fans jumping and all that sort of stuff. That's not. I don't think that's particularly his in Diego's DNA. But I think we probably have to wait until the end of the season to see where he's at. But I think if you would have said to Jorge Mas at that press conference with the Rusty Pelican or wherever it was back in the day when the world was half normal, you'll be, after 14 games, you have 3 wins. I don't think he would have believed it and probably wouldn't have accepted that either. So we probably have to have this discussion in a couple of months as to what the future is in terms of the coaching and all that sort of stuff. I do think, just to finish there, Diego Alonso has been given us a bit of a hospital pass, he's been on the back foot from the off, and I think now you're seeing the sort of repercussions of him trying to change everything up. It's been hard for him, so I kind of had some sympathy for him as well.
Yeah, I think it's important too to look at this from a perspective that includes COVID, that includes playing at home without fans, and that includes an expansion team, right? So you can make the argument that perhaps they should have brought in a coach earlier when they were making all the personnel plans. But obviously they didn't get the person that they wanted originally. And even getting Diego Alonso, considering his success in Mexico, considering his success in the CONCACAF Champions League, that was no small feat, right? I mean, this is a guy who obviously had another market available to him, whether it was in Mexico or in Europe. And let's not forget that he played a lot of his football in Europe, at Valencia, for example. So I think that when we judge his work, I think it's important to look at those factors. I mean, expansion teams for the most part don't do well. Atlanta United, LAFC, Chicago in 1998, if I'm not mistaken, those are outliers, right? They're the exception to the rule. And then there's the home advantage. There is no home advantage anymore. That is gone. And there are some games, if we look at some of the games that Inter Miami has played at Inter Miami FC Stadium, that they could have won, but they didn't. And perhaps the difference was not having however many thousand people in the stands pushing them on. I mean, is that outlandish to think that way, Franco?
I'm not buying it, man. I'm not buying it. I'm sorry, dude. Like, Miami and Nashville are two expansion teams. Miami has invested more money in their team than Nashville has. We don't have the exact figures because the salaries haven't been released, but you can just clearly see by the squads who has invested more money in their team. Nashville has 5 more points than Inter Miami this season, and they are in a very similar situation. Yes, they had one home game with fans in the stands. So, okay, maybe you can take that point away. But based on points alone, they're better than Inter Miami, and that's mind-boggling to me. But Diego Alonso has said this in different moments over the past month or two. Like, they're going to go into the offseason and fine-tune positions and adjust different positions, and they're going to keep bringing in players of good caliber. And he has said that when referencing, signings like Matuidi. So, like, he has a different idea for what the team's going to be. Maybe they can make it happen, and I don't think he's anywhere close to being on the hot seat, but he has plenty of fault in this as well. He has it's not only his fault; it goes deeper than him, but he has plenty of fault in this as well.
We can't go much longer, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to deal with what you've got. He has sort of mixed it up. He's mixed up the defense a bit. He's chopped and changed in midfield. Pizarro just hasn't been doing it. I know you're probably going to disagree, but he hasn't been the sort of dominating force like that. But Tweedy's not. He's sort of easing in. He's just been given a bit of a difficult hand. I mean, he even said to my question the other day about Beckham, I have to get a Beckham question in, but he said, he's spoken to David, and David's excited about the future we've got and all this sort of stuff. So that does definitely hint at they're going to be sort of chopping and changing. And I think also if there were fans there, and there were fans there when they lost 4-1, I think the heat would have been stronger on him, and I think the boos would have started happening, and I think that would build up. So in a way, that's good that the fans aren't there, just so they can just try and solidify it and get this kind of team and roster that they want. I think if there were 20,000 every week when they're getting beat 4-1 at home, I think the pressure would be building on. I think the tensions would be heightened considerably. So maybe it's a good thing if it's not COVID's not a good thing.
Well, that's actually
yeah.
I was going to say that's actually a transition for the last question, and we're going to have to answer this quickly because, once again, we've gone way too long. But I do want to say this. I do want to make this point, and that is, statistically, if you look at the difference pre-COVID and post-COVID in terms of home advantage, it is an enormous chasm. And we've seen it in numerous leagues. Whether that would have been the case in Inter Miami, we don't know. Theoretically, maybe. But the point that you just made, Steve, about the heat being on, I think is an interesting one, because I think most people would think it a bit harsh to sack a manager in 2020 after the roller coaster ride that we've had with COVID. But here is a question for us to do a little bit of fantasizing about in the PG-13 way, Franco. So don't get too excited. This comes from Jorge Medina at JMed0725. Our questioners have some really good numbers here. If Diego Alonso got sacked, unlikely right now, he writes in parentheses, who would you be looking at to replace him, an ideal manager? So, Franco, I'll start with you, and I didn't give you too much warning unless you've seen these questions. So I'll give you about 20 seconds.
If, right, we're talking if, and we're in a hypothetical world here. If if I'm Jorge Mas, I would splash the cash. I come with David Beckham, splash the cash. Marcelo Claudio be like, look, man, we got to come together, get this right. Go get Marcelo Gallardo. Pay him what he wants, because supposedly that was the issue with not being able to bring him on board, was that his staff wanted X amount and they didn't want to give him X amount. I think even Paul McDonough alluded to that at one point. So if we're living in a world where Diego Alonso is no longer the coach of Inter Miami, splash the cash, go get Marcelo Gallardo, and bring him to Miami to play this free-flowing and attractive and exciting soccer.
Steve?
Well, yeah, but you've got to have the players, though, haven't you? You've got to have the players. I don't think they can play that way right now with that squad. I mean, I think Pep's going to be available at the end of next season, so maybe they can try and get him. It's going to be it's difficult, isn't it? They balked at Gallardo's wages. I think Vieira would have been great. Did quite a bit of stuff with him in New York. Just the kind of guy. Just everyone loved him, and he had such a presence about him. Hasn't really been an amazing success as a manager, but it's been solid enough. But maybe I'm just looking at it from journalistic eyes, and I just want a sort of bigger name. But I'd like, from our dealings with Alonso so far, he seems like a good guy, hard worker, very serious. So let's just maybe let's see what happens in the next few months before maybe axing him.
Yeah, I think it'd be crazy for Marcelo Gallardo to come to MLS. And by the way, his River Plate does not play free-flowing attacking football. They are a pressing team, and they are a very direct team, and they are a lot of fun to watch. And I'm not sure that Inter Miami's players would fit that mold. As far as my answer to that question, there's only one right answer, and that is Chris Armas. Chris Armas needs to come to Inter Miami to change the fortunes. I kid, of course. No disrespect to Chris Armas. I actually think he did quite well with what he was given at the Red Bulls. But I will say this to end the show, and that is that we have to give Diego Alonso time. He's proven that he's a quality coach, and I think, Franco, you're absolutely correct that the issue is the crux of the issue is that you have players before you have a manager, and then it's tinker time, right? So that is the obstacle that Inter Miami is going to have to overcome while being able to keep the fan base whom you've been feeding very high expectations happy, right? And losses
they fed the expectations. I mean, that was them, wasn't it? They fed the expectations. Jorge Mas coming out and saying we're going to make the playoffs before they actually kicked a ball. So, that's you set them up.
He said at the Rusty Pelican, and I will not forget this, and I will continue to point to it. And I know this is not a one season project, but we're going to be the most important team. We want to be the most important team in this hemisphere. So this is definitely not helping you in your quest to become that, because no one expected Inter Miami to be this bad this year. So I think Alonso is going to get time. I think he deserves time. I wouldn't go as far as Eric and saying like there's it'd be mind-boggling to get rid of a coach, because we saw what happened to Frank de Boer, got let go in Atlanta. There's apparently other coaches on the hot seat in MLS this year. So I think Alonso will get the time, and we'll get another season to get more of the pieces he wants and showcase the soccer that he wants to get his team to win games. So, and I agree with what Steve said. He seems like a hardworking guy, wants to figure it out, is really trying his best, but we'll see he gets a little more pieces that fit his style.
Here's the disclaimer to end the show. Anything said at the Rusty Pelican should not be taken seriously. And with that, just a quick reminder that you can drop a review on iTunes, and you can check us out on all the different social media platforms. That is mostly Franco fighting insects and giving you all the latest information on Inter Miami. A big thank you to Steve on his first pod. Congratulations. But you also get an incomplete from Franco. I'll give you a B- for now. Until next week, Big Soccer Heads.